Good morning, everyone. 恭喜发财, Happy New Year. 猪年快乐, Happy Year of the Pig. I didn't do it. You guys could congratulate my control. I wanted to actually have a picture up with a pig in an electric vehicle, but I couldn't find one. Well, welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. I think more people are coming in. They were the people who didn't wake up early enough to scrape their car. Did anyone have problems unlocking their car this morning? No? Obviously not, because you made it here. What? Oh, that's what it said. So my name is Jennifer Turner, and I've been the director here at the Wilson Center's China Environment Forum for about 19 years now. Could be 20. Let's do the math. Yeah, it'll be 20 later this year. And as many of you who come to my meetings regularly know, that we look at energy and environmental issues in China, trying to start up new kinds of conversations. And I can think of nothing newer and more fun than new energy vehicles in China. For those of you who, everyone in this room has probably been to China, well, obviously my speakers as well, and you know how increasingly crowded the roads have become, and that while the Chinese government has done a lot in working on decarbonizing the coal sector, they've recently started turning their eyes to the car sector, which in some cities has surpassed coal emissions for PM 2.5 and other pollutants. And so, because of all this excitement around new energy vehicles, I thought it's time we started to have a meeting on it. And as luck would have it, Feng An, who we haven't seen each other in 10 years.
Maybe, yeah, long time.
Maybe longer.
No, maybe shorter, I don't know, around that time.
It's okay.
Yeah, we couldn't remember.
So, yeah, well.
But we know each other for such a long time.
We've known each other longer.
Like 20 years.
Because when I first came to the Wilson Center, and someone came to me with a question about cars, and someone said, well, you should call Feng An at Argonne National Laboratory, and I did, and you helped me. I think I sent groups of Chinese your way. It's been good. So I'm glad that I can finally get you up here to speak. Today our meeting topic, well, you saw the topic, come on baby, drive my new energy vehicle. We're kind of wondering about the question, will China really be the first country to abandon combustion engine cars? And to start us off today, Feng An is going to kind of cruise through the new NEV roadmap and kind of the trends and kind of shifting away from combustion engines, and how it could benefit China. Yeah. Right? You got that right?
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Benefit the world.
and if I'm wrong, you just completely you do what you want, because you will have the microphone.
Okay.
And the next, now Scott Kennedy, down at the end, so he wears two hats at CSIS. He's the senior advisor of the Freeman Chair in China Studies, and he also directs the project on Chinese business and political economy. So he's a leading authority on Chinese economic policy and dives particularly deeply into industrial policy and technical innovation. And those two issues come together today in his comments. He's going to look at potentially at some of the obstacles, dare I say, potholes, to China reaching its ambitious reboot of the auto sector to be completely free of combustion engines by 2050. Not like he's going to be a complete downer, right, Scott? Some optimism, some pessimism, or are you going to?
We'll see.
We'll see. I like that. No movie trailer. So then we have Camron Gorguinpour, who is from WRI, one of my newer friends at WRI. You guys it's like giant mafia over there, and I'm glad that I was able to pull you in to speak today. He's the senior global manager for electric vehicles, and he's going to, did I get your title right? Yep. And so he leads WRI's efforts in trying kind of the strategy on expanding electric vehicles around the world. Q&A, I might want to know more about how you guys are doing that. He's going to take kind of a step back a bit and look at some of the global picture on how China's electric vehicle expansion, kind of the ripple effect on the global economy, kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, what are the impacts? So that's enough about the intro. I think enough people have started filtering in. And and your job, ladies and gentlemen, is to think of difficult questions to ask these people. It's a rare opportunity to be able to dive deep into clean energy vehicles in China. And here we are. All right, so make sure you speak into the mic, and here's your clicker.
Thank you.
This goes forward. That doesn't work. Just forward or back.
Yeah.
Don't press that button.
Should I move closer to the
I will tilt
PC?
this.
Yes, I can. Okay, a little bit. Yes, thank you. Hopefully I can memorize what I'm going to talk about. All right. Thank you. I'm so glad to be back to DC. I used to live here for like 3 or 4 years. That's 20 years ago. So I'm so glad to be back here. I will talk about new energy vehicle development and oil picking scenarios in China. So briefly about, I think most people don't know about us. So we are 12 years old. And so it's nonprofit based in, have office in Beijing and Los Angeles. And we helped China to introduce the first fuel economy standards for cars and trucks. And recently, we just introduced the California zero emission vehicle policy in China. So that's been, Chinese government has implemented into a NEV credit mechanism to replace the EV subsidies. So we are very proud of this effort, working with our partners in China. So a little bit landscape about oil dependency in China. So in China, the oil dependency reached 75%, 71% last year, even though China has set the red line for the oil dependency, like 67% back 5 years ago. But this line had to be crossed. So China has seen a very rapid rise in the oil dependency. But that trend actually will change. We will turn the corner very quickly because a lot of reasons I'm going to talk about in the following several slides. But transportation contribute over 55% of the total oil dependency in China. So we see there's 5 major trends in transportation sector. So the first one, the fuel economy standards for internal combustion engines, then the electric cars. Those are the government-led efforts. But we also witness the industry-led, innovation-led effects, which is shared and micro-mobility automations. Those are entirely industry-led. And the government just try to play catch-up roles. Then we see the community enabled a broad societal effort. It's called mobility as a service trends. So that's why, when you think about the mobility sector, the EV is only one part of the components. So I think, increasingly, we will need to pay attention to the last 3, trends. So that I want to give you a perspective. So that's why China is very good on, show the strong ability to, top-down approach, but it's a bottom-up approach. I think that give you the best promise. So that's we will shift our effort to the mobility sector as a whole, not just the EVs. So the 3 key drivers for new energy vehicle. The new energy vehicle, it's called only China called the new energy vehicle. It's supposed to include fuel cells, also hydrogen, also the the natural gas and the biofuels. But of course, it's just means electric vehicles. So there's 3 key drivers. One is industry transformation, to like EV all-in strategy. So this is because despite the auto sector is very unique in China because when China entered WTO, it sent one of the key promise is to open up the auto market. So the auto industry in China is the most competitive, sectors in China is, is different from all other like internet, power sector. So the auto sector is actually, is pretty wide open, and so the foreign brands, the multinational dominate the market for the past 30 years. It's always have 80% plus market share. The Chinese domestic brands never crush the 20% barrier. So the EV considered is maybe is a way to crack that that ceiling, and to China to make Chinese auto sector can be more industry domestic can be more competitive. So that's why this is a very important driver, and of course the pollution is a very key driver, blue sky, strategy, and so the terrible air quality. I think that's that's cause for the electric vehicles. And then the energy security, as I have mentioned. So I want to give you a quick overview of the landscape in China. China, it's 10 years journey. I think in January of this year, there's an EV 100 meeting in China. So they kind of celebrate the 10 years of the EV policy in China. China basically launched a very large-scale EV program right after the financial crisis, and this is part of the stimulus package. I think the 2 key sectors benefit from stimulus. One is a high-speed rail. It's going to receive a huge grant money for the stimulus, and the EV is the next one because before the financial crisis, it's pretty much the fuel cell hydrogen economy. Everybody, work on fuel cells. There's a fuel cell roadmap. But then, the financial crisis happens, and also Tesla become very successful. And so that's kind of changing the direction for the Chinese government. They realize the EV could be the next big thing. So that they started the journey for stimulate EV development policies. So the first 10 city, 1,000 vehicles policy starts from 2009, and so it's kind of striking, how this Chinese government start to set up all the targets. It's kind of stunning to see how that target is being met, one by one, and many of them have been surpassed. So this is really it's not surprise, not just surprise, not just kind of foreigners, are very surprised. Even the policymakers, the experts in Chinese scholars and government officials, professors, they are very stunned about this success. I talked to like Ouyang Minggao, who is the head of the EV promotion program, chief scientist with the Tsinghua professor MIT. He's skeptical when the target's been set. But everybody got really, really surprised. And so you can see the manual of the short manual of this long policy measures. I think that shows their met the standards one by one, and 20% by 2025, for the vehicle sales. And they also set the standards, I think, 2 million sales per year by 2020, which will be easily met because this year China sold 1.25 million electric vehicles with 60% increase. So if you keep that trend, by 2020, it's going to be more than 2 million vehicles being sold. Electric vehicles, and so that is a big. But there's two important policies I think on the table. Last two. One is, China declared to phase out all the EV subsidies by 2020, and I think it's very. So I see the report that this is the part of the trade talk, U.S.-China trade talk, concession China has made. But actually, China government has made that decision at the early of 2016. So this is not a result of the trade talks. So because China government realized the problem of heavy subsidies, and first of all the financial burdens, they could not afford because when the volume becomes so high, and secondly. There are a lot of frauds, and cheatings about receiving subsidies. Also, there's over capacity, over development. So I will talk about that a little bit, and lead to very bad quality of EVs. And so we did a consumer survey. We have a program until in the last. I will play a video. So consumer has a lot of complaints about the EV model. They have no choice. They are kind of forced to buy them because that's the only, if you live in Beijing and Shanghai, and Shenzhen, that's the only vehicle you can buy, new vehicles, then otherwise you won't get a license plate. So I will show you that, the video slot. And so that's a very big news. And China also opened the market for international competition. That's how the Tesla get into China. That may be part of the U.S. pressures because Tesla is the first automaker that can have 100%, wholly owned, in China, and BMW just purchased additional 25% share for their Chinese counterpart. Now they become controlling interest. All other automakers in the past can only be a minority owner of the joint venture, but that has been changed greatly. So the last policy we have is to introduce NEV credit trading mechanism. It's kind of copied with California scheme. Basically, the China start to set up the NEV credit each automaker has to meet. I think by the 2020 that will be 12% NEV credits. For each automaker has to meet to sell cars in China, but 12% is now so one car equivalent to 3 to 4 NEV credits. So that's translated to about 3 to 4% of electric vehicles each automaker has to sell in China.
I should note that the PowerPoint slides will be online, so
yeah.
I mean, he had 10 years on one slide, but that's good. Thank you.
Right. So I give so I give you a quick show about the global EV. I think the next two speakers will talk about that. So it's reached 3 million the electric vehicle stock in end of 2017. So that is after they reached 1 million by 2015, 2 million by 2016. So that basically is an increase of 1 million units by each year. And so China last year, sold 50% of a global total, 1.25 million units. It's 40% in 2017, and only 1/3 in 2016. So it's kind of been challenging for us to keep track this chart, because if you use the chart which is 2 years old, figure it's irrelevant, it's out of date. So this always challenging to keep up with this. This changes so rapidly. And so this is a EV kind of ownership by Chinese cities. I think all the 6 top cities, they have a largest EV ownership rate are the cities which have ICE, internal combustion engine. It's called ICE, vehicle restrictions. So they lead the number of vehicle ownerships. And also most of regions to have, those are, NEV, no surprising, ownership rate is concentrated on the east coast of China, big regions on China. So the EV ownership rate compared by global cities, I think China last year, the new EV sales reached 4% of the total vehicle sales in China last year. So it's 4%. And I think I just got a figure, the vehicle, China has about 250 million, 2.5 million electric vehicle stock, which is about 1% of the total vehicle stock. So the EV has crossed the 1% threshold as total stock, and sales just outpaced because last year is the first year traditional ICE vehicles sell down by 5%, and so that's why I'm talking about the traditional vehicle sales already reached the saturations. So the future growth will solely from the electric vehicles. And so I talk about I think some Q&A I will mention about the oversupply. There's how many EV makers in China? There are over 400 EV makers in China, all kinds, big, small, and assemblers, OEM, and there are just 40. For example, the past 3 years, there's 40 new entrants. Just for electric vehicle passenger car automakers, like NIOs and Ferrari Future. There's 40 of them, and so each local government have their own kind of a baby, and a company to support, and so that's where the money come from, because they get a big support from local government, and so that question is how sustainable. So I will give answer maybe later. This is the big questions, and that will be interesting questions. So one project we are working on is to create a China timetable for phasing out traditional ICE vehicles. I think when one deputy minister made an announcement that China will start to study, the roadmap for phasing out. That's 2 years ago. That's created shockwave, in the world media, and people get worried because it's biggest auto market. If they want to ban ICE engine, that's going to be a big So that's but since then they haven't they try to keep silence, and but we start working on this timetable with our partners and in China, and try to create a timetable, and so this timetable is not a government official timetable yet, but we give a first try, but we stay in close communication with our, government team. So we are not far away from what they are thinking. So basically, that there's a timetable, global timetable to phasing out ICE vehicles. I don't give details about that. Some of the led by countries, some by regions, some by cities. And they all have put out the ICE vehicle bans, ranging from starting from 2025 to 2030, basically. And so basically, China, if China publish any ICE vehicle bans, that won't be the first one. It's kind of following through some other smaller countries, especially some smaller European countries and other California and some other regions, And so, so in the process, Chinese government have already announced, the target for the electric vehicles up to 2030, and so a lot of that is inertia because the vehicle has a very long lifetime. So if you have policy targets established by 2030, it's going to be spill over all the way to 2040. So, and if from this chart you see that the total production is total vehicle, 30 million vehicles. That's going to be by 2020. Right now it's over 25 million vehicles in China, so it's going to be 2020 together. So the NEVs share reach 6 to 7% by 2020. It's going to be 2 million units. It's going to be 5,000 fuel cell vehicles, and also they're targeted by for the the fuel economy standards. So those are the kind of a policy has been kind of adopted by the Chinese government official policies. So with that, we actually added additional policy policies from 2030 to 2050. So to reach 80% oil reduction. So the peaking transportation oil demand peaking will be around 2025. That will actually 2023 to 2025. So that's going to be very close to the peaking we are right now. And so I think in China, the overall greenhouse gas peaking is about 2030, and the oil sector, entire oil peaking maybe about 2030. But the transport, because the other half of the oil, like for chemicals and those are difficult to dramatically reduction. But transportation sector, I think we have a much better idea how to reduce them dramatically. So we think 80% reduction is very achievable. It's I think this is all the major country pledged by mid-century to dramatically reduce oil dependency. So here we proposed a roadmap to phasing out the internal combustion engine vehicle, and China is a big country. Now people think China is the continent. I meet a lot of Americans. They haven't been to China. And they have never been to China. They've been to China. Realize, wow! After all these years, they realize China is a continent. It's not a country per se because it's too large, too diverse, and each region has so different development strategies stage. So that's better way. Also, local protectionism is very very strong. So it's a very strong local kind of a tribalism mentality. So if you think China as a one single country, you may be mistaken. So we think China. That's why we have a 4 phase of a schedule, and so the first phase of the is going to be the major cities. In the like tier 1 cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. Those are the first city will phase out internal combustion vehicles. The second region tier will be the capital cities, mostly capital city along the East Coast region, provinces. Then the third tier is going to be all the East Coast, region, provinces. Then the rest of the countries come with last. So it has to be by phase, by stage. So this chart I can go back to show. That's first one, second region, third region, rest of country. Okay, and so the vehicle will be phased out by vehicle type. So they are not going to be like every type will be gone. I think the first category will be the like taxis, and network vehicles and official cars. As that be first phase. The second phase will be private cars. For commercial vehicle, we see the buses and the urban delivery vehicles will be the first target. They are they will be all electrified. Then the heavy-duty vehicle will be the last. So we see the process start from 2020 all the way to 2050. So you see that by phase, by vehicle type, and by region. That's the schedule. So let's give you an example about this phase-out schedule. And for the PV1, which is taxis, rental cars, official vehicles, so most car will be traditional car will be phased out by 2025. So they are going to be replaced by the green green bar, which is pure electric cars. And for private cars, they have a slower phase-out rate, and they will be, there's transition, for hybrid. A lot of hybrid vehicle, will take place. All the yellow bars are representing the hybrid vehicles. So then they will gradually, facing over to a green area. And so I had a conversation, I had a talk last, 2 days ago at Columbia University, and this schedule, we think this schedule pretty aggressive. Then people make joke that, this is nothing to compare with, green deals. They want to phase out, they want to all the electric vehicle by in 10 years. So compared with that, we are less aggressive, but
they're deep green.
The deep green. Green deal, yeah. So that's interesting note I have. And here, I think I may want to go back to these questions, so I want to show you a video because there's so many focus on the government policies and the code numbers. People sometimes forget there's the consumers. There's people behind those code numbers, and electric vehicle is deeply a consumer product. It's like cell phones. It's no different. It's not like you're dealing with the power plants, the green buildings, all this industry sector. So this is the consumer goods. And China is increasingly a consumer-driven society with increasing middle class. So we think consumers have their opinions. They start to voice up their opinions, and they start to complain about the poor quality and the less of choices. I think we start to we interviewed like thousands of consumers about their opinions about the electric vehicles, and so we created this platform, and it's called Best EV. So I want to play this video so you can see how we do that. You just click here. Yeah.
去钻研、去学习国外一些悠久的车企的一些文化呀，包括他们的理念，包括技术各方面的。
中控台这块的按钮太多了，白花花一片，到处都是。它提速到50码以后，相对的提速能力就差，续航也是它的一个瓶颈。
怕掉电吗？一冬天基本上就。
你快充再提不上来，你就跟不上时代了。技术上多下点功夫，在服务上下点功夫。
不把顾客当上帝的企业，它最后的结局就是被市场淘汰。
研发第一，关系也很重要。小区当时
反正不是这台出风口像一个大号文，
类似的味道还是多。那你因为我们现在有这种焦虑感。
让每一个电动车车主都可以影响另外一些想购车的人，
让每一个车主在这个平台想说、敢说、不停地说，
让每一个车主的声音都被放大，被车企、社会倾听，
让每一位车主的吐槽都可以转化为行业发展的原动力。
技术类需求与意见收集对接车企，
服务类需求与意见收集对接 4S 店。
举办线上线下活动，对接车主意见领袖，
及时传递亲身体验，指导购车选择。
There's a bit more, but
They have opinions.
yeah, there are people. China is not all about Xi Jinping and the central government. I mean, that's crazy.
Okay,
everybody's talking about them. Okay. Okay,
right.
I think we can stop here.
So stop here, and maybe at the end we'll put up the questions that you had.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you could definitely watch. I think we'll need
It's
to
spot
load the
on.
video online too, because I don't think we got it online yet.
Yeah,
But
okay.
Could you
Yeah.
follow it? Could you see, read
Yeah.
quickly? I think.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have it online. I just can't help thinking when I was back in China in 1987 going to department stores. You had no choice of anything.
Right.
Just take it. All right. Some applause for a very entertaining, quick overview. And we're going to move over to Scott. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself a little more as I get your PowerPoint up, or just?
I'm okay right here. I just need the clicker.
We need the clicker. So just press that to go forward, and please don't press the square button because it'll turn everything off. All right.
Terrific. Well, Jennifer, thanks for having me. participate in today's event, and Anfeng's presentation was quite stimulating, and I look forward to Cameron's as well and the conversation with everybody. I think Jennifer put it well at the beginning that there's a lot of excitement about this industry and what China is doing. I think the basic thing that I'm going to try to emphasize today is that it's a lot of hype, that this excitement is exaggerated, and it's leading folks to adopt policies that are harmful for the public. And we need to be careful about what China is doing and what we do. China is not a small country, and everything that it does has global implications. So the problems that are exhibited in China's electric car industry will be global problems for the global electric car industry and for transportation solutions. So we need to be very careful. I'm not saying that China should abandon its policies, but it might need some serious reforms. And so I want to highlight that side of things today, not a total downer, but I want to bring a little bit of realism to this, because enthusiasm is not enough. You need smart policies. And I just say, I just wrote a report. I brought a few copies with me. We issued in November. We spent 15 months researching this industry. We're still following it. It'll be included in a book that I'm working on about China's high-tech drive more broadly and the commercial and strategic consequences of what it's doing. So this is part of a broader project that we're working on. When I first went to China in 1988, only 31 years ago, there were no private cars on the road. It was very safe to get around. It was very hard to find a taxi. It was very hard to get anywhere.
But you had a bicycle, right, Scott?
I did. I traded it for a painting, which meant I couldn't get anywhere, but I could enjoy looking at the painting. So China had an initial auto industry to support, as Anfeng said, which basically ended up folks being interested in foreign cars. It was not an open market. Foreign companies were required, mandated, to form joint ventures with Chinese and transfer their technology as part of those joint ventures, the policy which exists to this very day, with essentially no change. To this day, there are future possible changes, but they haven't been implemented yet. As a result, it led to significant problems, dependency on the Chinese part, not independence, which is what they were hoping that would come from this. Fast forward to the last couple years, and as Anfeng said, China's exploded an EV market, which now accounts for over half of all electric cars sold in the world. It's really amazing how quickly China's market has developed, and how quickly it can continue to develop. And it makes it look like China's winning a race. And I think when you listen to Chinese, they discuss it like it's a race, like it's a competition, and they make everyone else feel like they need to participate in this race. And I actually don't know if we should consider this a race, and I don't know if winning this race is a good thing. China has, by my count, over 500 electric car makers. Some of them are really fantastic and do really interesting things. In December, I went to an event held by one of those electric car companies, NIO, which is based in Shanghai, but it's really a global company. They have employees from 80 countries. They set up their headquarters their European headquarters right across the street from BMW. And as folks walked out of BMW one day, they had an employment sign hanging up in the street, and folks just went across the other place. So actually a lot of NIO's employees are former BMW employees. It's actually quite common if you look at Byton, another electric car company, also basically mostly former BMW. I don't know what's wrong with BMW, just shedding employees so quickly. And this NIO day was fun. They did this in a 10,000 seat stadium. in Shanghai, introduced the new ES6 onto the market, showed tons of data about how terrific the car is, the quality of the battery, the range, et cetera, how many different ways they've improved it. Even more importantly, at the end of the car exhibition, they had a Bruno Mars concert. And so this gave me 5 minutes of street cred with my kids. Even more importantly, they handed out cool stuff. So I got this hat, right? And I thought, it is dangerous. No, that's off the record. That's off the record. You want to eliminate my street cred, you can take that picture.
You are bribed.
Yes. So, any case, very impressive marketing and not a bad product. They have a chance. They have an interesting business model, very challenging one, and they are trying to fill that luxury car space where really there's not, where most of China's electric car makers are in the lower tier, bottom tier of the market, in an economy car. Their cars are relatively expensive, around 300 to 400,000 renminbi when you're all done, and they're trying to hurry up before Tesla, Daimler, and others come forth with luxury cars. So impressive and cool hats. But some serious, I think China's electric car industry has some serious problems that I want to highlight. The first is that it's government run. This is not a bottom-up market. There is no bottom-up element to this industry. We went and did the math of how much government spending there is, and it's almost $1 trillion through 2017. We then calculated how much commercial activity there was in the spending of cars, and we found that government spending accounts for over 42% of all commercial activity. I didn't say 42% of profits. I said 42% of all commercial activity. That means this industry does not exist. It doesn't exist without the government creating it. So there is not a market. There are commercial exchanges that only exist because of government involvement. The subsidies are a big part of that, but R&D subsidies, tax breaks. This doesn't include so many other areas in which the government has provided support to these companies, in-kind subsidies with regard to land, with the taxes the companies pay that have been forgiven. Really, it is a government creation, this industry in China.
Clarifying question, is this for all vehicle classes or just passenger vehicles?
This includes buses, everything. We calculated everything. We totaled up every type of vehicle that was sold in China and all of the subsidies and everything that went to support them. So that's a lot of government support. There are a lot of other ways in which the government is been providing support. Before I talk about the battery makers, I'll just mention another element of government intervention. An Feng touched upon it, the dual credit system, the system that encourages companies to have a proportion of their fleet as electric, modeled, as he said, on the California system, but very different from the California system. The California system is a credit market where companies can buy and sell credits. If you don't produce electric cars up to that credit line, you can buy credits from those who've overproduced. In China, this was advertised as a credit system. It is not. It is a mandatory system that everyone needs to be above the bar. And they have not announced the mechanism by which the price for these credits will be created, and what that price will be. Because if they did do that, the price would be near zero. And that is because everyone is overproduced. But they want everyone to keep producing, to be above this. So a good commercial strategy right now, because there's massive overcapacity, if you're smart, you do not make electric cars now. You buy credits of everyone else who's making electric cars. Wait till these 400 plus companies mostly disappear, and then you get in the market. But the policy is a mandatory policy. It's requiring everyone to produce. So it's been misadvertised. And I've talked to lots of car companies. They have no idea what the price of these credits are going to be or if they'll ever be announced. And that is consistent with other types of pollution markets in China, where they have never been able to actually create and implement a market-based trading system on any kind of platform nationally, which is what they would need. In the case of batteries, which I've shown you here, massive obstacles to foreign companies providing batteries in China. The world has three successful global makers of batteries, Samsung, SDI, LG Chem, and Panasonic. They've been banned from the Chinese market. They cannot sell batteries in competition head-to-head with Chinese battery makers. What that has done is left space for Chinese battery makers to fill that gap. The most important is CATL. You've probably heard of BYD, which is a battery maker. But BYD, until this year, has made batteries for only its vehicles, and they're starting to sell to others. CATL is a company you need to learn about. It is now the world's largest electric car battery company. Its technology is not bad. It was formed originally out of a joint venture with a Japanese company called TDK. Those of you of my generation and older would recognize the letters TDK because they made cassettes. But they're also a chemical company, and they are very good in this industry, and CATL bought them out. The other thing you need to know about CATL is it's based in Fujian in a small town no one's ever heard of called Ningde, except for the interesting fact that Xi Jinping was the party secretary of Ningde in the late 1980s. Is it a coincidence that CATL is now the world's most largest electric car battery company? You think about it. This is a big challenge. In addition, because of the massive spike in demand for electric cars in China, which is a government creation, that has had a huge effect on the inputs into batteries, the raw materials, and particularly lithium and cobalt. Lithium is all over the place. I could probably have it in my backyard. But cobalt's not. It's from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is very undemocratic. As a result of this rush to come out with electric cars, the price of lithium, of cobalt skyrocketed, and then because of overcapacity has fallen like a rock. That's not a really good thing for commodity markets to face. It's very similar to the problem we had in 2010 to 12 with rare earths. And we could see that again. As Chinese industrial policy waxes and wanes, to reach the targets that An Feng identified, they will not get rid of subsidies. They will have to bring those back. A very large portion of electric car demand in China are government agencies, which are mandated to buy electric cars. If you went and interviewed people on the street and said, would you buy an electric car, 99+% would say never. So they're going to have to come back with subsidies, which will then drive the price back of these commodities again. Charging infrastructure, another obstacle. Because electric cars, pure electric cars, must have an external charge to them, you have to do it either in a place like something akin to a gas station, or at your office or in your apartment building. Most Chinese don't have homes, so it's very difficult to have widespread, ubiquitous charging. Right now, China has by far the largest number of publicly available charging poles in the world. The numbers keep growing radically. I think we're up, 400,000 or 500,000 of these poles, but they match the regional distribution of where cars are. So that's 3 cities: Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. You cannot possibly have a national goal of eliminating internal combustion engines when the charging infrastructure is so regionally isolated as it is now. in order for people to be able to really have confidence in electric cars, the availability of charging needs to be ubiquitous, and it has to be extremely fast. And the fast is actually the harder problem, because then you have to have a power grid that'll support it. You have to have a charging pattern that supports that grid, which means there needs to be a lot of charging at night. And that's very difficult for people to plan. Now, the Chinese have aimed for a trifecta where everything would come together. The real hope is to have electric cars in fleets of rideshare that are autonomous. That is the trifecta that everybody wants in China. That would eliminate the significance of the hood ornament, one of the huge obstacles to Chinese car companies, which is a big reason foreign companies have continued to dominate, because of the power of the brand. In the last month, how many people have done rideshare? Right. Keep your hand up. How many of you remember the model, the brand of the car you got in? Nobody. You don't. A couple people do. Yeah. But did you order?
It's because it was a Bolt.
As a Volt. Yeah. Yeah. So, but you don't care. You're just reliable. It doesn't matter, right? And so that would be the Chinese would love to have electric rideshare, and if autonomous, even better. But this is really a pipe dream. It is really difficult to have a electric car rideshare. And the reason why is because if I do ride sharing, let's say I put my car up, and I get on the app and I'm going to do Uber or Lyft or Didi, I need to know what my driving day is going to be like. And so does Didi. But I don't know at the beginning of the day. And they don't know either. So I have no idea if I need to drive 5 miles before I need to charge again, or 100 miles before I charge again. Electric cars are really poorly suited for a rideshare, for a taxi-like environment where I don't know what my riding day is going to be like. And so you have to. And so unless charging is as quick as putting gas in your car, then electric cars are not good as a stable source of a rideshare fleet. Autonomous vehicles, that is a really difficult thing to do in China or anywhere. The big technological obstacle for autonomous anywhere is called our edge cases. Those relatively infrequent cases that require a lot of computing power to make sure you don't kill yourself or someone else. Special turns, people walking across the street, a cliff that you need to turn away from that you can't see easily with sensors. In China, edge cases are all the time, because you've been to China, you know what the driving environment is like. So so rideshare and autonomous are not going to be hugely supportive of electric cars in China. Okay, so last problem, technology lock-in. Lithium-ion batteries, pretty good technology. Changing the chemistry, using more cobalt, more nickel, gets you higher energy intensity. Okay, but they're just okay. They get you a few hundred miles, maybe. They don't get you as far as hybrid would, as hydrogen fuel cells, which would get you 3 times as far, and have none of the problems with the materials going in, the raw materials that you get. They don't have the same recycling problems that lithium-ion batteries will eventually have to deal with. But hydrogen fuel cells are being made in a technology that's going to be impossible to really develop to scale, because all of the money has gone into lithium-ion batteries, because China decided they wanted lithium-ion batteries to be the technology. There are folks working on hydrogen fuel cells, but it's going to be really hard for them. So we're likely to get technology lock-in in a technology that's probably better than internal combustion engine, but not necessarily better than hybrid, and not necessarily better than many other potential alternatives. So I see a variety of problems. Massive government spending, other market-distorting policies, market access for cars, batteries, for the components, a whole bunch of different imbalances that result, technology lock-in, and lastly, I didn't mention, everyone knows what Chinese air looks like. because you can see it. Friends I know call electric cars coal cars, because the car still, the electricity has to come from someplace. And China has reduced the proportion of its energy that comes from fossil fuels down from 80+% to around 73%, but still 60+% of that 73 is coal. Right? Now maybe they can get the coal better or whatever, but it's still coal. So the real job is to reduce the original source of the energy to make it not come from fossil fuels. That's where you get the big bang for your buck, not the application like a car. So until China changes its original energy sources, this is really just changing one aspect of the equation. Final point or two, and sorry to go on for so long. The problem that we face with electric cars is not unique in China. It looks just like the solar industry, where the government has put massive amounts of money in that sector, which has helped China's solar industry, but has been destructive for the rest of the world's solar industry, and led to technology lock-in in solar. And this is also what is happening in the robotics sector and in other industries where China is really stepping on the gas. So big market, but destructive for the rest of the world. Different from other industries, but is unique in this space. This is a product of a state-driven approach to this industry, and looks very different from e-commerce, from biopharma, much more bottom-up, market-oriented. And so this sector is an example of a broader problem in China's political economy. So I'm deeply concerned. Let me just say, in terms of policy, because we are in Washington, D.C., obviously it'd be great if China were to open up its market more in all of the spaces, from subsidies to how joint venture policy has been implemented, dual credit. I think in terms of what the U.S. ought to do, regardless of what China does, is continue to promote technology pluralism, and not just support electrics and hybrids, but also all the other different types of potential solutions, including fuel cells. But more, in addition to supporting the development of these technologies, what's really missing from American policy is the demand side of support. People have to want these things. They have to see them as cost-effective, good solutions. If people don't buy them, we're not going to want to. Who's going to want to develop the technology? In the case of batteries, the Energy Department has a program called ARPA-E, and they've been providing funding for folks to do R&D on batteries. But those folks do that research, and then they look around for a place to commercialize it. They don't see it nearby. They get up and they take their tech to China. So if we want to have a viable new energy vehicle sector or transportation or in others, then the federal government, not just individual states, have to provide support for both technology creation and demand. Otherwise, we're not going to win this game or any other game.
But you said it wasn't a race.
It wasn't a race.
All right, some applause for a first time ever a silver hat wearing speaker. With some good sobering insights. All right, so now it's on, so hopefully you won't.
Well, I don't think I can match the silly hat. I didn't bring a prop. But I'll tell you.
You have great pictures.
Thank you. So my name is Camron Gorguinpour. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm with WRI. I am helping the organization develop its global electrification strategy, of which obviously China is a very critical element. So this slide deck is, I could just as well call it stray thoughts about China. And so as it relates to—
meandering drive.
That's right, exactly. So as I go through it, I'm going to share my stray thoughts about China. Feel free. Is it okay if they chime in as I go through, or would you rather wait to the end?
I think if someone is so enthusiastic and has to leap out of their car to, well, we have to get you a mic, though, because we're doing webcam.
Okay. Well, okay. Yeah, if I say something you like or don't like, feel free to at least just scream out profanities. So, anyhow, okay. So getting started. First of all, our perspective is that China is a window to the future. That if you want to know what are the obstacles and challenges and hopefully some best practices for the future of transportation. There's literally no better place in the world to look than China because they're doing more of it in more ways than virtually anywhere else. So examples of things that we're looking at commonly discussed is Shenzhen and the 16-some-odd thousand electric buses that they've just deployed. The operational and logistical challenges of doing that, the charging infrastructure challenges of doing that, the cost of doing that. That's just one city. I think China last year sold something like 100,000 electric buses. Which, by the way, talking about government investment, that's like it's in the billions, tens of billions of dollars, right? That's about the budget for the U.S. Department of Energy. Just 1 year worth of electric buses in China. So in our view, the fact that they've done it, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea for policy, the fact that they've done it to us means that we should be looking and learning every last possible thing so that we can inform the rest of the world about how these buses perform and under what conditions, and how to plan for it. Other things just more generally on charging infrastructure. So Scott mentioned issues around grid stability. Well, that's a huge issue, especially because the public charging infrastructure, and presumably the private as well, is so heavily concentrated in a very small number of cities that the grid planning around how do you manage the distribution system when all of a sudden you have hundreds of thousands of EVs in a given city, that's non-trivial. And there's virtually nowhere else in the world that you can actually look at what the grid impacts are, and where people are actually in real time as part of not a demonstration, it's not a pilot, it's a real thing, figuring out how to resolve those issues. And so we really feel that, again, probably the best, most valuable transportation export from China is the information that they're generating just by having done this work. And by the way, I'll talk a little bit about it later, but we want to talk a lot about passenger cars because they're sexy. We talk about buses because China's done so much on electric buses, but also on the smaller platform vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, that sort of thing. There are hundreds of millions of electric vehicles in China, and understanding those dynamics is also something that's especially important through the rest of Asia, that frankly there's been just a little investigation regarding. So I believe it is a race, just to be clear, and I think the West is losing badly in the U.S. Under the current administration. It's not just that we're losing; we're like the opposite of trying. We're trying to do poorly in this race. We're running backwards around the track in the United States, and that's, I think, bad for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, because of some of the issues that Scott raised, that if China is going to set these policies and dump hundreds of millions, maybe trillions of dollars into this market, and we believe that zero-emission transportation is the future of transportation, then the rest of the world is effectively ceding that space to China. And so, so on the one hand, it's I appreciate the comments, Scott's comments, but for the rest of the world to sit back and say, "Oh, China sucks for doing all these things," well, we have a choice. We could go out and implement similar policies, but we're not, or better policies, but we're not, except for California. And California, frankly, is the reason why there's electric vehicle industry anywhere at all. Because of the fuel efficiency, fuel economy standards, plus the ZEV program, probably had a greater triggering effect than any other singular government action. And of course, under Obama, there was a lot of investment into R&D, but again, without a hard mandate, there's really not much the governments are doing to spur this industry outside of China. And Feng's put up the slide of all the different ICE prohibition targets starting in 2024 out through some as far as 2040. And that's cool if they actually follow through with it. But saying that, hey, auto industry, in 2030, I'm going to stop you from selling ICE vehicles is an invitation to delay. It's an invitation for lawsuits down the road, and without any further policy engagement to lower the price point, make the vehicles more accessible to poor people, you're going to end up, first of all, with lawsuits that are going to delay these targets. And second, even if you were to impose them, you're going to get a bunch of people in yellow vests throwing Molotov cocktails at every EV they see on the road. And so it's only really through these sort of step increase mandates, in my view, that you actually cause the auto industry to take appropriate action. So the ZEV program in California plus the NEV program in China, these are the only government constructs that we're aware of in the world that actually cause the auto industry to have to do something. And I have lots of friends who work in the auto industry. I like the auto industry. They're good, nice people. But if you believe that the auto industry, in and of themselves, is going to somehow transition miraculously by 2030 or any point to anything but their cash cow internal combustion vehicles, you should have your head examined, because they're not going to do it. And if they were, they would have done it already. So from a policy perspective, a mandate is really the only thing that will trigger this type of action. And I guess probably the last thing to say on this regarding China's NEV program is that it's probably actually not even aggressive enough. And in a moment I'll talk about city-level policies, but I mean, you look at the map of where EVs are being adopted in China, they're being adopted in cities that it's virtually impossible to register your vehicle unless it's an EV. And so with those types of policies in place, the motivation for automakers is really going to be just to sell within those cities. And so, without some sort of construct to push the vehicles out to the smaller tier cities on the rural areas, you're really just going to focus on those areas. And that's not bad. I mean, okay, it's better to have EVs in those cities than nowhere at all. But just to be clear, the NEV policy is basically just reinforcing those city-level policies. The other thing that I think is missing from China from a policy perspective related to the NEV mandate. So the NEV program is based off of California's ZEV program. Again, I think California's ZEV program is great. I'm sure even the folks in California wish they could be more stringent, but in terms of a balancing act between government enforcement and industrial interest, I think that the California ZEV program really actually strikes a very reasonable balance. But the best part about California's ZEV program isn't what they're doing in California. It's that they have these Section 177 states, the 9 other states that opted into California's policies. Now, California is something like 15% of the domestic auto market in the United States. Those other 9 states are another 15%, roughly, of the domestic auto market in California. So by creating these travel provisions where a car sold in Rhode Island counts for actually multiple credits, more credits than what would be sold in California, all of a sudden now you're incentivizing the auto industry to go into smaller markets where they would otherwise have no interest. Not to knock Rhode Island, it's a lovely state, but I promise you that no automaker really cares about selling vehicles in Rhode Island except for that they have this mandate that they can satisfy credits. So when we think about China from a policy perspective, and I'm sure China has an interest in sort of the international trade elements of the vehicles that they're producing, it seems to me that there's an opportunity to look at the California model to see if there are multinational agreements that could mirror what California has done with these other ZEV states. And without that, again, it's cool, but you're going to end up with the bulk of EVs being deployed in maybe 5 cities in China and virtually nowhere else in the world. And so, again, I think it's a missed opportunity to not look more broadly at that international collaboration. And as I mentioned, the city policies are critical. I'm pretty sure that for the people in the video that Feng showed earlier, that all those negative critiques, probably if you surveyed them, I would guess that the reason why they own an EV at all is because they have to own an EV if they want to own a car. And so, we can't diminish the role of cities. And this is a lesson, I think, for cities around the world, that they do have power beyond their provincial or national governments. I don't think you're going to get in the U.S. too many outright bans on registering ICE vehicles, again, because nobody wants Molotov cocktails thrown. But things like gradients and registration fees. Has anybody actually registered a car in DC? Nobody's registered a car?
I know people who haven't.
Intentionally? Okay.
I mean, I've had people who've tried and then they, like him, got rid of their car.
Yeah, so when I first moved to DC in 2009, I had a car. I lasted about a month and it wasn't worth it. I got rid of it. Only just recently, actually this month, I got a new car last month, so I had to go get it registered this month. There's exactly one inspection station in all of DC for every registered car. And so you get line, like I showed up at 6:45, they open at 7, I was like, I'm good. And then I saw that there's like, you know, a 3-block line of cars and buses waiting. So, you know, city level policies don't have to be outright bans. It doesn't have to go that far. But frankly, just making things easier on people with EVs. My inspection, by the way, for my electric car was ridiculous. Like all the things were not applicable, not applicable, not applicable. Why did they make me show up? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. And so, you know, things like that, I think, are really important to motivating consumer behavior. The national policies, I think, are great at ensuring that there's a supply, potentially an oversupply in China. But one of the things I think that we can learn is that city-level policies are really the driver for consumer choice. And so, again, something more to consider. The future of public transit is made in China. Virtually every other company outside of China that produces buses has seeded the future of public transportation. Now, there are 30-some-odd electric bus companies in the world, so it's not that they are the only electric bus companies are in China. It's just that the only ones that are actually selling their products internationally in large numbers is really BYD, Yutong a little bit. But virtually everybody else, Daimler doesn't care, Volvo doesn't care. We have a couple here in North America, Proterra, New Flyers out of Canada. They're selling really just in the United States. So if we believe that the future of transportation is electric, maybe even fuel cell, well, nobody else outside of China is really playing this game. And so, you know, and then so it's a bet. You know, Volvo is making a bet that for the next 20 years, cities in South America are not going to give, I was going to use a bad word, are not going to care about, care one bit about electric buses, electric transportation, and that they'll be able to sell their Euro 5 diesel buses for the foreseeable future. And they're making that bet. They're actually building manufacturing capabilities for their Euro 5 buses in South America. And we'll see, you know, we'll see. But if they're wrong, they've just basically conceded all of public transportation to China.
Yeah, I think China's even making our new metro cars too, right?
Are they making the new metro cars?
I think so. I think I heard that.
So there are 14 electric circulator buses in DC. I don't know if there's a BYD, maybe. Probably. In any case. And by the way, all of this is happening you know, outside of China. I think the Santiago, Chile has the largest single procurement of electric buses, 250 BYD, right? Medellin, Colombia just got something like 60 BYD. And so BYD is putting themselves out there and going after business. And again, you know, I think that the other bus makers are you know, betting that it's not going to work. And frankly, BYD buses have mixed reviews, to be kind. You know, so, but even with that, they're selling in large numbers in and out of China. What I can say is that because of the number of vehicles that they have operating in China, it's very likely that the quality of technology for all the China automakers, I'm focusing on BYD because they do the most international sales, that their iterative process hopefully will improve the quality of product. And I think we've seen some of that already. But you know, even with a poor quality product, poor reputational product outside of China, they're still selling more than anybody else.
Just a quick question, is the BYD, I mean, are they getting a lot of government support to do this? Just kind of,
government support to sell internationally?
Sell internationally? Or
well, sort of. It's the Chinese banks that are providing the financing that's enabling cities to actually minimize the capital expense.
So they're driving on the Belt and Road?
Yeah, something like that. Something like the driving on the Belt Road with a loan from HSBC. But So anyhow, to Scott's point, because it's all Chinese government driven, one potential concern is that if, and I'll get to it in a minute, but if this is all a bubble propped up by the Chinese government, and then there's a downturn in the Chinese economy, and that investment ceases, well, now we're affecting public transportation everywhere in the world. And so it's a problem. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that there are hundreds of millions of electric vehicles operating in China. And this was a surprise to me because, when I do electric vehicles, I think of cars and trucks and buses. You don't think of the little two-wheelers, but the fact is that there are an insane number of electric vehicles that nobody's really paying attention to. Now, primarily, I think almost entirely, these are lead-acid powered vehicles, very poor quality, low range. People buy them because they're cheap. From an emission standpoint, though, why not, right? It's definitely reducing emissions to have that many electric two-wheelers. But there's virtually no policy around this, other than maybe restrictions in like low emission zones where you can't drive an internal combustion vehicle of any kind. And from an infrastructure standpoint, I think it's really interesting too. I mean, these are vehicles that are typically charged in people's homes, with an extension cord out the window. And so without significant amount of thought on how to actually prop up this industry in a way that's meaningful, I think we're missing a lot, not just in China, but again, this class of vehicle is incredibly important throughout the rest of Southeast and Southern Asia. And again, this was discussed in the previous presentations, but EV batteries are powered by China. So Tesla has its gigafactories, that's cool, but virtually everything else in one way or another is happening through China. From the mining all the way through manufacturing, and in the mining, the cobalt, it's like 90% of cobalt that goes into EV batteries is coming out of Congo. Virtually all of those mines are owned and operated by the Chinese companies. And so virtually the entire supply chain of electric vehicle materials and components is happening in China. And so again, from an international policy perspective, we can talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Certainly there's a lot of core electronic parts that are made in China. But again, if we believe that the future of transportation around the world is electric, then perhaps there are policy considerations that we should be taking into account. This is one of my favorite recent topics that very few people actually really talk about. Not so much in China, actually. In China, the used car market's actually pretty small, but in the US, in Europe, even in India now, more people get their cars used than new. And so one of the more interesting things that we'll have to look at in the next couple of years is what happens to these used electric vehicles. Are they going to stay in China? Are they going to move out of China? In either case, where are they going? How are they going to be supported? What happens to the batteries? Are we just going to have to scrap a bunch to use EVs? If we have to scrap a bunch of used EVs, that's going to affect financing mechanisms, because then you're essentially zeroing out the residual value on those cars. And by the way, the same would be true for buses. And so the understandings, the essential policies and practices around the secondhand market of cars, I believe, is sort of the emerging front in the battle for expanding electric transportation. You're going to get millions of these things on the secondary markets potentially, and I don't think anybody's really thought through what to do with them at that point. And then I will concede this slide to Scott's presentation in that, yeah, we should be completely worried. I love most of what's happening in China around electrification, but I also understand, and I learned that it's around $1 trillion in spending. I didn't think it was that much. I thought it was in maybe the hundreds of billions. But that's a lot of government investment, and that cannot happen indefinitely without serious consequence. And so, planning for a bursting bubble, I think it's prudent. And other countries, again, I don't think it's a meaningful exercise to critique China for the policies that they've put in place. I mean, frankly, you know, the U.S. put in an equivalent amount of money in then-year dollars to send humans to the moon, but nobody was saying, oh my gosh, you're setting the world back around commercial spaceflight because you're putting so much investment into sending people to the moon. So I don't want to critique China for making a decision that they wanted to be real serious about transitioning to zero-emission transport. But at the same time, I think we should be real and understand that there are serious risks around that. So with that.
Oh, good. Oh, you're not going to leave us on the depressing bubble popping.
No.
Okay.
No,
All right.
an e-taxi.
All right, some applause for really 3 very electrifying speakers here today. I know that, just remind me, so Scott, you're going to have to slip out at 11:15? Okay, so we want to make sure kind of maybe a little, make sure, Scott, you direct a few questions to Scott. And I know I'm going to put Feng An's slide back up. He had some questions for discussion, but I have a feeling the China Environment Forum audience is never shy. But when you, so make sure when you ask a question, just say who you are, where you hang your hat during the day, and yeah, try to be succinct with the questions so we can get a lot of them in. You guys could go first because I have some others, but I'll let you go first. Make sure you have the mic first behind you. Microphone, Karen. There we go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet TV. And Scott, since you're going to be leaving, this is a question to you, and I'll get the others later. But looking at the trifecta you're talking about, this electric, rideshare, and autonomy, how do you see that playing out, and what kind of policies do we need to look at as far as the United States and possibly Europe, Japan, your major markets, and then leapfrog into, say, Latin America and the African continent, which we've not talked about whatsoever, with 1.2 billion people, 2 billion probably within the next 20 years at least. And so how do we shape this so that we have a coherent policy, but we're really addressing climate change, but at the same time economy as a balance?
And I'm going to gather like 2 more questions. So I guess we'll pop to the back of the room. And you can stand up so we can see you too. It always helps.
Hi, my name is Steve Andrews with the Congressional Executive Commission on China. Thank you, Jennifer, for your enthusiasm and for the great presentations. I wanted to ask, Scott had the great anecdote about Xi Jinping and Ningde and sort of the success of CATL, asking whether there was any connection between that. Similarly, Dr. An talked about sort of local protectionism. Before, people always used to talk about guanxi and connections. You see it less, but you see more discussion of the Chinese Communist Party. And so my question is, how should sort of U.S. foreign policy be aimed at sort of attacking or sort of challenging these negative connections related to the Chinese Communist Party? And sort of more specifically, can a company like Tesla or American companies succeed in this electric vehicle space? Thank you.
Okay, and third question, a trifecta of questions. How about right there?
Hi. Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm from New York University. So as we have, so basically, I think all guest speakers have talked a lot about the oversupply of electric vehicles in China and like the insufficient domestic demand. So I mean, I feel like there's a missing link between these two sides, which I think personally should have something to do with the communication. So my question is that we have discussed a lot about like government mandate. So when and how should the government integrate the bottom-up approach within the current mandate-driven plan based on the feedbacks from consumers and automakers on probably like a city level? And what can electric vehicle sellers do to convince domestic and international consumers probably to purchase more private cars, not just like the electric buses that have been subsidized by the Chinese government?
Okay, good. All right, so Scott, shall we have you start off? You guys think you guys all have things to answer here? Ask.
Sure. I mean, I really learned a lot from both of my fellow panelists, and I think they probably know a lot more about this industry and the environmental side of things, but more than I do. In terms of maybe I'll start with the question about what American foreign policy ought to be, and then talk about the other things. whether it's regard to the current negotiations that we're engaged in or the longer-term effort of engaging China and its efforts in high-tech innovation. With regard to this space, the first thing that we want to do is if we want to get into these markets, we have to have a product, right? So if we don't have a product, we can't say that there's a market barrier. The first barrier is actually we have to get American car companies to make new energy vehicles, whether they are electric or hydrogen fuel cells or other things at scale with the ability to be serviced globally. And currently they haven't done that. So that's the first thing. That's just, we've got to be in the game to say that the rules are unfair. If we do that, then we need to push China to eliminate its joint venture requirements. Now, they have set, there's a 4-year timetable by which they're eliminating them, but the way in which they have announced those and the way they're implemented, to me, looks like essentially they're going to still mandate them to be existed. Commercially, I bet you all the joint ventures that currently exist will exist in 5 years because of the way they're implementing this. So, for example, they have obstacles on creating new factories and getting new models approved. Basically, what they give with one hand, take away with the other. The other issue is government procurement. Since China's not a member of the WTO's government procurement agreement, it doesn't have to have any of its governments buy electric vehicles that are open to anyone else. So, and that is a humongous proportion of electric vehicle sales, particularly when you're talking about bus fleets and things like that. So if we ever came around to making enough electric buses to sell, they'd be blocked out of the market because of China's government procurement policies. Those are the kind of things we could do vis-a-vis China. I guess we need to worry a lot more about sort of commodity supply chains and the transparency and investment and deal with questions of recycled batteries or the used car market, et cetera. Anyway, those are just a few random thoughts. On the trifecta and U.S. policies, again, I would just encourage technological pluralism. Yes, lithium-ion batteries look like a great idea, and changing the chemistry to make them, the batteries give you longer range is good, but they may not be the best thing down the road. So we have to create R&D and market space for optionality around the world. More broadly, I think we need to think about future transportation solutions as sustainable. Sustainable in terms of the energy sources, in terms of accessibility, in terms of cost and stability. That's so our current the rideshare models that we have right now, that is sustainable for everyone but the drivers. You can't make money. It's way too risky being an Uber or Lyft driver because those companies have put all the risk on those drivers. That's why they can charge you $2 to go across town. So you have to really figure out how to make those models work better, and so that requires government regulation as well. We're going to have to figure out how to roll out autonomy in stages so that it can get better over time. There's lots of different things my colleagues probably know better. I think in terms of quality, in the case of China, in the U.S. we have J.D. Edwards Power, all J.D. Power and Edwards and others that do these ratings for cars. China has some, but they're not nearly as comprehensive or as available for people to see. Essentially, the way you can make electric cars ubiquitous is to have consumers not pay attention to the electric part of the car. That the propulsion system of the car should end up only being one minor element of a reason why someone picks one car or another. And so currently they aren't rated along with other cars. And so you think of it as an electric car. You shouldn't think of I don't think of an Audi something as a internal combustion engine car. I just think of it as a cool car. So until you reduce people's awareness and emphasis on the propulsion system and the source of energy, to make it just like any other car, then I think it's gonna be seen as a niche product meant to be an ethical choice to solve some public good problem, that's not what is gonna drive consumer behavior.
You two want to jump in and answer some of those three questions?
Just a point on ride-hailing in China and electrification. Just to note that Didi actually has 400,000 electric vehicle drivers on its platform, and they have a goal of 1 million by 2020. They also have created their own sort of dedicated charging station network within those primary cities where they have a lot of drivers with EVs. So certainly on the combination of ride-hailing and electric is something. It's one of those things I'd put under the bucket of things we could learn from China and export elsewhere. Again, I'm maybe to put it in a little more perspective, there's something like 30 million vehicles total on Didi's platform. So 400,000 or 1 million isn't a large percentage, but in terms of raw number, what other fleet actually has that many vehicles operating?
Yeah, first, I'm quite impressed about Scott's presentation. I saw that you are economist, but you have very good understanding on technological issues. And I think the question you raised, I think very legitimate. I think a lot of those questions, I think government, Chinese government is quite aware of. And I have to make, there's so many concerns about, the EV. I think that's kind of a question. I think we've addressed. Basically, there's so many people come to me, scholars and experts about, they worry about the EV. So I think, for those, I don't think you should, first of all, those like solar panel and EV makings become very low margin. It's of very low profit. Everybody is losing money to make cars. So, I think the strength of America is like create brands and create service. So that's the future of mobility. It's not to making cars. I think it's very low profit margin. And that's why American companies are abundant. To make cars. And so if you look at people, I think Americans worry about losing jobs, and but you have 3.5% of unemployment rate. So so you basically there's full enough create a lot of jobs which is not related to manufacture. So and also like you said, there's so many overcapacity. I think the multinationals are entering the Chinese market for the very first time, because before, right now, 95% of the electric cars in China are domestic made, but that's going to change when Tesla start to, build factories, then the Ford, the GM, and they all open, joint venture EVs made in China. So I think the very first time, the domestic EV maker will face severe competition from international brands. I think they are worried about their own survival. So they are not really worried about whether they can invade, the U.S. market. And so I think that's maybe the concern is overblown. I think maybe you see some, I think most likely, some electric cars will be maybe, imported to U.S. This mostly will be made by joint ventures. So how do you? This is a global market. By the end of the, maybe in 10, 20 years, you have 10 big global companies, and they are going to make cars. So it's not really about domestic Chinese automaker. It's going to be mostly, it's merged, it's a joint venture, it's kind of integrated. It's going to be integrated. 95%, 98% of those, the EV makers in China, they go bankrupt. There's only, when dust settles, it's only a few emerge. So it's going to be highly globalized marketplace. And, China is totally, the multinational is dominating. Chinese part is, they are simply serve as financial partners. I think when you have joint venture, it's dominated by, multinational foreign brands. The Chinese partner is only financial investors. So, and so when you talk more about the technology transfer, but that has the most of that, the financial gains for the multinational is inside of Chinese market. They haven't spilled out. So basically, they are all about to conquer Chinese market, and they get a big reward. Like VW and General Motors, over 1/3, 40% of their profit is from Chinese market. and that hasn't translated, so-called transfer of technology has not translated into, losing market share by multinational. But I'm only talking about the auto sector. It could be the case. I'm not talking about other high-tech case. So I think that's maybe overblown. I think it's going to be highly integrated on the global markets. It's going to be led by joint venture. It's going to be multinationals. I think a few Chinese companies, maybe so far none of them has become a major force for multinational force. But by the end of the day, they're going to be dominated by a big multinational corporation. So I don't think you need to already worry about that. So that for autonomous driving, that is so far off the table. I know you can't worry about this, the robotic autonomous, but this is like only a piloting research. I don't think you will see that in next 10 years.
But China is throwing a lot of money into AVs, and they've got all these big plans.
Right.
We have a blog coming out on AVs soon, so stay tuned.
Yeah, China have played heavy hands on all those policies. So for EV situation, you can argue, it's bad or good. I think there's different perspective, different arguments. But I think, basically, China will phase out all the subsidies. So I think that's going to be that's something we need to watch. Is that in next 2 or 3 years, what's the impact, after the, phasing out subsidies, in the next 5 years. Actually, it's ending 2020, so you see the effect, by the 2021, 2022. So you will see how that's going to be affect, the EV sales in China. I think that will be interesting to watch. So I just want to make a quick comment before Scott,
you could ask him a question too.
Yeah. So I want him to have respond to what he's talking about.
Okay, one thing I wanted to throw out here, my question is that, and one of you mentioned about EVs or coal cars. And I'm wondering, do you guys know if in China, maybe, let me finish my question first. Is that whether or not,
no, what are you going to ask?
Is there someone, is WRI or iCET, who's looking at how China, what are they doing in terms of their grid? Is there conversations to do renewables to support it? We've done research into distributed power in China, that basically, rooftop solar, and it's not going well. And so when you're thinking that, are they going to be able to get clean energy to fuel these cars? Did you have a clarifying question?
Yes, I'm also a Benjamin Dales freelancer. Also curious about, is there enough of an efficiency gain from switching to electric vehicles from petrol vehicles that there are still some emissions benefits, even if the power is coming from coal?
I can.
Okay,
I can generally,
WRI, big think tanky.
Yeah, I can generally address both. So in general, even in China with a high coal mix, you expect some sort of carbon emission reduction. Obviously it's not as significant as it might be in like Latin America or parts of Europe and the United States. But I think the one, quite questionable category vehicles, buses, that might not be the case. But for smaller platform vehicles, they are much more efficient, and you would expect an emissions reduction. In terms of linking the grid emission goals with electrification goals, that's something I've been specifically looking for, not just in China, anywhere in the world. And I can't say it doesn't exist, but I haven't found any explicit linkage between grid emission reduction targets and transportation emission reduction targets. And that's something that I think is an obvious thing that we, thank you very much, that really from a policy standpoint ought to be happening. One other point that also, I'm sorry, on the emissions question related to coal, it's really important also to remember that the driving force for switching to zero-emission vehicles or low-emission vehicles, especially in Beijing, Shanghai, and urban large cities around the world, isn't carbon. It's to get rid of air pollution within the cities. And certainly, even though you might be displacing the emissions, usually those emissions on coal aren't going to happen right in the middle of a city center. And so there's a public health benefit regardless of the carbon emission reduction.
Yeah, I think regarding of the the emissions benefits, on the current Chinese power mix, like Scott mentioned, it's about 70% thermal and 60+% coal. I think there are a lot of studies to show that there are going to be from greenhouse gas, it's going to be like a marginal. There's going to be a benefit for EVs in the current power mix, 20%, 30, maybe, in the range. And but China has a very long renewable energy, goals. So they want to have 50%, renewable energy, target, done in the next, 20, 30 years. So that will help to clean up the power grid. But that's that has been the big, debate. But I think you made a lot of good points, so that's why, still see the pollution benefit and the energy benefit a little bit, gradually increasing.
Scott, you have something to add there?
Just a little bit. So I think I'd agree that there overall some savings. The biggest change is that you're moving the pollution. You're moving the pollution from the coastal cities where there's lots of EVs to the interior where they're burning all the coal. So from the highly visible places where foreigners and media are to politically less powerful places where still lots of people, but they don't have as much influence on policy. So it's you're saving the lives perhaps of urbanites in first-tier cities, but you're not improving the health chances of folks in other parts of the country. So I think it's mostly redistributing where the pollution goes rather than the massive downside. I think most of my suggestions, and even though putting out criticisms, is I agree this is a very smart way to go. They just need to improve the policies quite a bit, and of course we need to step up and do a lot more. So I'm not saying that we should go to gas guzzlers a la that fantastic
I heard
picture.
you say we should transition everything back to diesel.
Yes. No, I want to go back to horses. I want horses.
Come on, baby, drive my horse. All right, some questions out here. We'll gather 3 more, including Kent in the back. Yeah.
Hi, Chris Miller, U.S.-China Business Council. Just wanted to say thanks to each of you for coming out and speaking with us, really illuminating. My question is regard to subsidies and Scott Kennedy's remarks on government investment. So in regard to the new foreign investment, or not the foreign investment law, but the auto investment regulations that came out, I believe, went into effect January 10th, correct me if I'm wrong. What is the sort of level of government investment that we are going to see following that? And specifically, I understand that the law does 3 things, and that is, 1, takes investment from the central government level and tries to delegate that to local level authorities within the NDRC. 2, heavily restricts any new production facilities for internal combustion engine manufacturers. And 3, I believe, makes the threshold very high for NEV producers to receive government subsidies. If all of that is true, what is the future of government subsidies at local levels for auto manufacturers?
Okay, and then Yiting, and then Kent.
Thank you. I appreciate the very constructive conversations the panel brought that talks about both the promises and risks with China's EV development. My name is Yiting Wang. I work with the World Wildlife Fund on Chinese global ecological footprint issues. So I'm really interested in understanding better the strategies deployed by Chinese EV companies in going global with or without explicit state support. There was just a China Dialogue article talking about EV buses, Chinese EV buses in Latin America, and it really, I think, seemed to suggest that those deals were possible largely because of local government support in purchasing those going electric. And also there was even the Global Green Climate Fund supporting some of the cities to help them replace some of their fleets. So I guess there's both what's Chinese company strategy and what you see as governments in global other parts of the world that could do to help improve the environment.
Okay, and the final, since I love that we've trifecta question here. The trifecta of questions wrapping
Thanks,
up.
Jennifer, and thanks for bringing together another terrific panel. For Camron, is there any research being done on an alternative to cobalt? And for Scott, 2 quick questions. Does the NRDC have any plans for accelerating mergers among these 500 companies? And second, on the question of having a variety of technologies under academic development, won't we have to make some clear choices if we want to bring one to scale and market?
And to note, Ken Hughes, he's one of our fellows here, a jolly fellow. All right.
Which order do you want to go in?
You go ahead, Ken.
So on the cobalt question, companies on their own recognizing not just the singular source, but the human rights implications of cobalt from China, or I'm sorry, from the Congo rather, are already moving towards battery chemistries that are heavier in lithium and nickel. With that, though, cobalt will remain part of the battery technology for the foreseeable future. And just because we understand well the human rights implications of artisanal cobalt mining in the Congo, it shouldn't lead us to believe that there aren't similar human rights and environmental issues around the mining of lithium, nickel, graphite, all these other things that are involved in producing batteries. And frankly, other than batteries, there are rare earth metals that are essential to electric motors, for example. So short answer to your question is, yeah, people are working on reducing the amount of cobalt in batteries.
Okay. Who else? Do you want to jump in with some answers to
about the China go out strategies? I think the only BYD has been kind of successful in selling buses, in the foreign country, Shenzhen have more electric buses than in the rest of the entire global combined. So the BYD sell like 30 buses here and 30 buses there. They are not making any money by doing that. So they are subsidized by their headquarters. They call it the branding strategy. So they are not making any profit by selling buses in international market, but they do receive a lot of support subsidies in local cities like Los Angeles, also other Latin America, England. So it's small numbers, 10 buses, 30 buses. So, but for cars, China, there's no success. There's no electric cars. Yeah, they have a big talks, but it's very hard for China-made or China brand electric vehicle to crack into the U.S. market. It's long. I think it's very hard for them to.
So BYD attempted that maybe 10 years ago and backed out. On the buses, I mean, BYD, they they'll just hand out buses to cities around the world. Give them a couple, drive around.
Kensington, Maryland.
Wilson Center gets a bus now. Let us know. Yeah, let us know how it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
But and there are government incentives, local government incentives outside of China to bring in electric buses. That said, whenever financing is involved, typically it's backed by the Chinese government. And so aside from subsidy, the Chinese government or Chinese banks, nationalized banks, taking on things like residual value risk is effectively a subsidy. And so, and I don't see that going away anytime soon for the export of e-buses. I do think also BYD, in terms of their international bus sales, they've done an excellent job making most cities in the world feel like there are no e-bus options except for BYD. And so they've done just a wonderful job we've actually helped cities realize that there are other options, and then those cities have picked BYD. And so anyhow, I think the BYD is certainly positioned to dominate the EV bus market globally for a good long while. And again, they're making a bet. Latin America is super important because there are, outside of China, I believe, more public transit buses in Latin America than anywhere else in the world. And so, it's a really important market, and just generally, bus ridership in Latin America is higher than anywhere in the world. So it's a primary mode of transportation, more so than in other places. And so, to the extent that BYD is investing in that region, it's really actually very important.
But one thing I've thought, because I've been, I gave a talk with Yiting was on my panel about greening China's Belt and Road Initiative, and one question that keeps coming up is China's doing a lot of the coal and fossil fuels going out, but you kind of look at these EV buses that it looks like it could be like a little bit of green diplomacy. Right, yeah. Because the buses in Latin America and India, I mean, they're using diesel currently, right? Yep. I mean, come on, last time you guys were behind a diesel bus, it's not a pleasant experience. Right. But I mean, this is good.
Well, yeah. Well, so especially in Latin America, because the grid is relatively clean in Latin America, and buses are so heavily used for as modes of transportation, they have disproportionately a high percentage of emissions compared to other sources. So the greening of public bus fleets, and as we're starting to work on the informal bus fleets, is a critical part of greening Latin America. So I would say it's definitely a good thing that there's somebody engaged. I would say that it's a bad thing that it's BYD only. Yutong has done some there, but again, BYD is the one that everybody knows and talks about.
So we don't have any, US doesn't have any EV buses?
So we have Proterra. Proterra is only selling within the United States. New Flyers in Canada, I believe they're also only selling in the United States. You know, and I don't know that either of those companies really has it in their growth plan to expand anywhere else in the world.
All right.
Hey, let me.
We got to finish. Scott's got to.
Okay. I'm sorry that I've got to run a little bit early, but.
He's going to hop on his EV bus.
Yeah, I get my scooter. I guess just first to circle back to some of the sort of technology issues and what the auto industry in general is trying to do, and including in China. So first is electrification, right? So you got to get the longer range in all different types of weather, low degrading of the battery, and things like that. Then we've already talked about auto mobility. Basically, really what they're focusing now is driver assistance, right? So can you park your car? Will the car park itself? Will it, you know, pay attention to the traffic around you and you know, give you a shock to the head to make sure you wake up before you crash? Things like that. That type of driver assistance. The other thing the Chinese car companies are working on a lot, which we don't hear a lot about here, is connecting cars, connectivity through services. So for your phone, for buying tickets, you know, WeChat, everything you can do on your WeChat app, they want you to be able to do on the screen of your car as well. And so I think that is a place where the Chinese are investing a lot. I think in terms of how it's going to play out, it's going to be about being able to do all of those things and what we want all cars to do regardless of the basic type of quality, interior, your exterior, all of those things. That's the one thing. The other thing is going to be how deep the pockets are of the car companies, because they're going to have to survive a few more years of no profits, right? And so who is going to be left? Because local governments don't have the money to step in and bail them out the way they did the solar industry. So at a case company like NEO, they've got $2 billion in the bank right now. And they're going to go back and get more money because they just want to be able to survive. So will it be them? Will it be Beijing, BAIC? Will it be BYD that can use its profits from other parts of its business to subsidize its entry into electric cars? A company like Zhidou has a lot of chances because it sells these little teeny things that is just like you wrap a car around your body, and they're the world's largest seller of electric cars, actually. So it's going to be how big your pockets are and how well you address those things. In terms of M&As, I would expect the government would want to be able to pick and choose how those occur, but unlike other industries, there's so many private car companies with investors, a board of directors, very internationally integrated. It's going to be very difficult for them to mandate you merge with any other company like the steel industry where they've done that. So I think just a normal bubble bursting and see who survives is probably the best strategy. Is what I would do. And then in terms of going global, you know, I think it's going to be partly following the Belt and Road and all the funding and financing that allows them to sell. The U.S. Chinese car companies are planning to arrive here the first quarter of 2020. So the 5 Chinese companies that want to be in the U.S. market in 2020. In a year from now, not just electric, but other types. And they're going to need to address all the issues that anyone who sells in the U.S. does, from safety to emissions to all those other things. And, you know, if they can try and persuade folks, I mean, the way Hyundai and others, and, you know, originally the Japanese, and start at the bottom and work their way up, it's certainly possible. I think I can see in my future countervailing duty investigation into Chinese companies because of the subsidies that they've had over time to make them available. I can't imagine that that doesn't occur. So, but so those will be impediments to this. So it's going to require technology, a lot of money, and really good diplomatic skill, and really good lawyers. I'm sorry.
Good job for the lawyers.
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm sorry that I have to.
he's going to, quick applause for Scott. And I'm going to be having make sure Scott here is going to be having a couple more meetings this year, diving deeper into the car issue. We're still going to take take these guys, get questions. But so Scott, I'll make sure you know when these other meetings are coming. Like David Sandalo just did a report on comparing charging stations in U.S. and China. So I hope you come in the audience so you can heckle the speakers, Scott. Thanks. All right, so oh, bless you. Let's, a question, we'll come back to you. Let's get a couple of people who didn't ask questions. You and then Safei.
Hi, my name's Praveen Kathpal. I'm with AES, which is a power company mostly with operations in the Americas. And I have one question about the private sector, one about the public sector. So for the private sector, what lessons can we take from what has been done in China to accelerate electrification in the Americas? And in the public sector, Camron, you had a slide that said the West is losing. Can you describe your vision of what winning looks like and what's needed to get there, and what's the minimum time frame for that to be achieved?
Okay, and then we'll take Safei, and we'll just take those two questions, unless it's a quick one, because we have to get Safei.
First, thanks for the great speaks. I'm Feng An. I'm from the International Council on Clean Transportation, iCET. So my question is on the EV supply side. So the expectation is the production cost will reduce over time, and as the technology innovation and scale up of the industry, and the U.S. and EU now is looking for the tipping point when the production cost and will make EV most cost competitive with the internal combustion engine vehicles. So my question is, do you have any projections on when China will reach to this tipping point? Is it earlier or later than the other leading countries, or it will ever happen to China at all? Thanks.
So,
and you can only have a super short question, because
I promise I'll be quick.
Super short.
Yeah, so my name is Matt Jerice. I'm from the Institute for China-America Studies. So I guess I'm kind of cherry picking from the TV screen there.
Pick one.
I'm curious if there's room for international competition in terms of charging readiness. Like, would we see Tesla charging stations in the same way as a Chinese stations scattered throughout?
So in China?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, good.
So I think the two questions are kind of related because they deal with sort of the market dynamics and when you actually get a price point where without subsidy, without policy, EVs are appealing to consumers in and of themselves. Zafei, to your question, Bloomberg, I think, says that by 2025, an EV, at least this is U.S., will be as profitable as an internal combustion vehicle for the manufacturers. I don't agree with that. I think do not. I think it'll actually be much longer because everybody was focusing on the decline in battery pricing and saying, oh, well, batteries are going to be so cheap that the cost of the cars is going to plummet, except that the cost of batteries has already plummeted over the past 5 years, 6 years. And we haven't really seen any reduction in electric vehicle pricing, largely because so much more work has to be done to improve the capability that whatever they're saving on battery costs, they're putting back into the vehicle to get you a longer range and better performance. And I don't anticipate that that's going to change anytime soon. Plus, by the way, we have no idea really what the profit margins are for an ICE vehicle or an EV. We're just taking it on faith that the auto industry is being truthful and saying that they're not making a profit. And so we have to keep subsidizing them. And so, so I don't really see much motivation on the industry side to really start ramping down pricing as long as there's government intervention to make things easier for consumers to acquire. But the good news is certainly the quality and performance of the vehicles will improve, and that will have some bearing on consumer choice.
Yeah, for the tipping point, I think most experts believe is going to happen by 2025 to 2030. I think I believe those time frame, I think it's going to be competitive EV in next less than 10 years. And I think I mentioned that the battery makers, the ACTL, I think they are so large, they have ability to dramatically reduce because the scale is big. The pricing, I think it's high. I'm not worried about Chinese EV will dominate the globe, but the battery could be the case because there's no competition for the battery in China. So they first dominate the Chinese market, then they're going to be dominated the global market because they are so. It's like solar panel things that can happen in battery sectors because they are so cheap. Even though quality is not as good as like from South Korea or from Japanese, but it's like solar. They're so much cheaper, so they are very competitive. And so the other question about the charging readiness, I think the public charging posts are pretty much is on the schedule, and I think but what's lacking behind is a private charging charging post. I think we survey the EV owners in Beijing. Only 1/3 of them have a home charging a station, so they have to. That's why they have to use the fly line to charge vehicles.
Is like a super long extension cord up your
extension cord through from windows from their high-rise building, and they charge your vehicle. There's so many of them doing that. It's very dangerous and
it's like a spider web coming out.
Spider web. Yeah. I think the other problem is the state grid kind of dominating the charging service in the primary locations because there are a lot of private business try to get into this business, but they cannot. They don't have access. They could not. They do not have access to connect to grid. Also, they don't have access to the best location. They need to build the charging post because I think Chinese has a new regulation for any new development. They have to be electrical charging ready. But for the old existing apartment, they don't have the electric charging, so they have to retrofit. They get a lot of resistance from the management, companies. So so that's created a lot of problems. So most of the TV owners in Beijing, they have to roam around, to find the public charging post. So that is a dragging. China want to have built 5 million private charging posts by 2020, but right now they only have less than 1 million, so they are far behind the schedule. So that can be the problem for the private home charging service. But for the standards, I think China has their own charging standards, so that's going to be a big problem. They have to coordinate, consolidate all the international standards and develop the fast charging facility. That's going to be a challenge, a major task.
But the government's obviously investing in it.
Oh, investment, yeah, big investment. Charging, maybe charging is not a part of this U.S.-China trade talk. So they may phase out all the vehicle size subsidies, but all the charging infrastructure, I think that I don't know. Maybe Scott will be sitting on the board for the supervise, Chinese compliance, but I don't know. So that could be a challenge. Yeah.
Well. Okay, we're coming. You guys came on time. I like any meetings on time. But what's good is that, there's an interest in this topic, and we are going to have in early April. We'll have David Sandalo and a couple of other folks. We'll go dive deep into charging stations and some of the. I'm really concerned about the pollution issues. I want to talk to you about other people to come talk about this. Again, I learned so much today. Can we applaud the two and then the missing Scott? I have to thank ClimateWorks and Luce Foundation for supporting the China Environment Forum, and let you know, next March 21st, we're screening DC Environmental Film Festival. We're doing a meeting, films called Thirst for Energy about water, energy, nexus issues. And in April, besides having another beep beep meeting, we're also going to have a meeting on short-lived climate pollutants, methane. We didn't even get to talk about methane capture for CNG cars. So many questions, not enough time. But thank you very much, y'all, for coming. And if you're not on our mailing list, come to me and we'll get you on it. Thank you.